You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Thanks for joining us for early check-in at Hotel Pacifico one more time. Good to see you, Geoff and Mike.
Good to see you too.
Oh, so good to see you this morning.
Looking forward to Monday morning.
Here we go. It's on. It's on.
Got my hat. I got my cat. Got my Super Saturday t-shirt.
The cactus.
Saturday.
Got my cactus.
Buckle up, guys. It's going to be a wild ride.
It's going to be a wild ride, says the cactus.
Yeah.
So
solid prediction
there
for the cactus.
So I'm ready.
You are a vibe today, Mike McDonald.
I'm happy this is the last episode of the election period.
Yeah.
Don't worry, folks. We'll be back next week.
It has been an honor and a privilege, gentlemen. And I am ready for I'm ready to move back to the rest of my life. All right. Stick around, guests, for our final epic espresso bar. We're finally there. We'll do our check-in now too with where the leaders are at today for their final push. Obviously, David Eby covering a lot of ground as he does. He's in Coquitlam, North Vancouver, Surrey, and Maple Ridge. John Rostad will be in North Vancouver, then West Vancouver, and Sonia Furstenau in Victoria. Quick recap of yesterday. Now, I'm going to need some help from Mike on this one because I think I'm searching for an adjective, Mike, the right adjective to describe that Conservative rally in Surrey.
Well, I think it was well attended. I think they maybe put out numbers that were inflationary.
Aspirational.
There was a number of 2,000 bandied around. It didn't look like 2,000 in the photo, but it was a healthy crowd, probably the largest crowd on the campaign trail yesterday, I would say.
Yes. Okay.
Healthy.
I threw you one there for a bit of character.
Robust. I usually when I hear about 2,000 crowds in Surrey, I think that's entirely plausible. Mm-hmm. I don't think that one was last night. But nevertheless, they were in Surrey and duking it out.
And it was big. All right. So that was the day yesterday for the Conservatives. NDP were in Yaletown where they had an endorsement from friend of the pod, Kareem Alam. Yeah.
Quite a journey for Kareem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we'll have to chat
for those
more.
who don't know, Kareem managed longtime conservative activist and organizer, managed Kevin Falcon's leadership campaign for what was then the BC Liberals. Parted ways with Falcon, started a return to a consultancy. He was also the campaign manager for Ken Sim, who's got notable Conservative Party connections, but declared last week, I guess, that because of his deep frustration about the quality of some of Rustad's candidates, particularly some of their racist comments, he was going to support the NDP in this election. So that's why he would be in Yaletown, where he lives, with Terry Young, who was a police officer till very recently and is now running for the NDP in Yaletown, which has always been seen as a tough seat for the NDP. So we'll see if Kareem and Terry and all the others over there can pull it off.
Yeah. Well, nothing good usually happens when a backroom person ends up in the front room, but we'll see what happens in this case. I mean,
I've carried that cross all my life, Mike.
You actually came by it on. You came by it honestly, Geoff. You put your name on the ballot. So
well, I was in a really tough nomination too, where I heard a lot about me sticking in my place, which for many people was somewhere on a different planet. But anyway, it all worked out fine. And then I went back to the back room. So
it was all building to your illustrious career in podcasting.
All to say what Mike says is not without merit. There's people who have that view for sure.
Yes. All right. And then we'll just note the Greens had an endorsement by Baby Beluga singer Raffi, who called Sonia Furstenau a strong and principled progressive. So that's our quick summary of yesterday. Anything else you want to touch on before we pour ourselves a big glass of data?
Showing my age, but my daughter, who's now a successful labor lawyer and very much an adult, I used to sing along to Raffi when she was 2 or 3, and so Raffi's been in that groove for a long time. Great singer.
I love that. Same. Baby Beluga was my jam. Like I driving around in the family Ford Aerostar, I'd be like, Mom, play it again. Love that song. Yeah, glad to see. I mean, we've got David Suzuki weighing in, Raffi, Chip Wilson, all the kind of
Gordon Campbell. Everybody
yeah.
wants in on it.
Everybody wants in. It's pretty exciting. Been a really real all the greatest hits for a BC election. All right, so I'll move us along. Again, big glass of data here for milking the data. Sorry, brought to you by BC Dairy. Farmers need guaranteed access to water to feed BC. So the numbers are still the cow's still working on it, eh, Mike?
Cow's still working on it today. Cow hasn't come in from the barn yet. But here's what we know. Yesterday we showed it was a pretty tight race, and we know that advanced turnout was huge. And
there's the adjective I was looking for.
What does that mean for? Well, I think both parties think they did well in the advance poll. You know,
genuinely think or spinning.
Yeah, I've heard from both sides that they both think. Leger came out with a survey yesterday that indicated it could be an advantage for the NDP on the advance poll, but that's just Leger. I talked about yesterday how big increases in turnout sometimes will indicate a change election. It could be that that the NDPers are turning out because of the reaction to the Conservatives too. So this is all a long way of me saying, I don't know. I think it's going to be close. And I think on balance, the NDP have an advantage in a tight election on a couple different levels. One is I think the vote splits do work in their favor to some degree, not a huge degree, but to some degree. And I think they just got infrastructure. And if it's coming down to a coin toss, I'm favoring the NDP to win. But if there is a surge, if there's a genuine surge of voters who haven't voted before or don't normally vote, who really have an appetite for change, I think we could be in for a surprise, or maybe not a surprise to everyone, but it might be a surprise to many people if the Conservatives actually do win the election tomorrow. So
I've heard all those explanations, Mike, but I also think in the last few days we've seen the Conservative negative campaign on EB step up through third parties like Gordon Campbell, Eric Carlson, a developer who did an editorial, Chip Wilson. These controversies, it's not clear that these people are widely respected validators or invalidators, but they're powerful voices that have been really pounding on the EB campaign in the last few days. So, but I've heard all the other versions that you've said, including some optimism from the NDP that the turnout's good and helpful for us, but at the same time, anxiety in a lot of quarters about how tight it is in many parts of the province.
And I think all parties should feel anxiety at this point. And my advice to everyone is if you want your party to get elected, you better get out and vote tomorrow. It's simple as that. Like I think Sonia's on the cusp of an unlikely breakthrough in Beacon Hill, but we just don't know if that's going to happen. They may be on the cusp of holding their seat in Saanich North, but we don't know. The Conservatives may be on the cusp of crashing through the Orange Wall in Vancouver Island. The NDP may hold back the Conservative surge in the Fraser Valley to some extent. There's so many what ifs here. The Independents may elect candidates. Karen Kirkpatrick might break through, or Tom Shapitka. Who knows? Like, we just don't have enough data to know for sure. And that's why it's so interesting.
Jess, have you got a pile of old phones tucked away in a drawer somewhere? If you do, you should know about TELUS's trade-in program, because you can bring those old devices in for credit. TELUS is a leader in the circular economy, having diverted 4 million mobile devices and 15 million devices, things like high-speed internet and tabletop boxes, since 2004. And TELUS's sustainability initiatives are helping to propel the province towards a more sustainable and inclusive future. This commitment to excellence hasn't gone unnoticed on the global stage. TELUS claimed the top spot as the world's most sustainable telecommunications company in Time magazine's inaugural World's Most Sustainable Companies list. That's a win for BC's hometown team, which is setting a benchmark for corporate responsibility that resonates far beyond provincial borders. And it's a relief for anyone with an overstuffed junk drawer.
But I think too, you may just pause briefly if we can, Kate, on the Green Party, because Mike said, and I agree with his assessment, that it's a titanic struggle in Beacon Hill, which has been a very, very safe NDP seat for a long time and a good candidate there in Grace Lore. But Sonia Furstenau running there, if she's successful, that's great for the Green Party. If she's not, it's really bad news for the Green Party. And there is a question mark over Saanich North and the Islands, where Adam Olsen was the incumbent and stepped away. So will the Green Party resurge tomorrow and establish 2 or 3 seats and remain a factor, or will they, on the other hand, disappear? I doubt if they'll disappear, but it's not out of the question.
Well,
go ahead.
They remain a significant factor in Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily equating into seats. It might, but I think the one thing I've noticed in this campaign is that Sonia's brand on Vancouver Island is really strong, and for me, that I will predict that Sonia will win her seat, because I think when a leader has a strong brand like that in an area sympathetic to her point of view, even though many may have voted NDP in the past, I think people generally say, you know what, this person can make a difference in the legislature in a unique way because they're a leader. And we see many over the years across Canada, oftentimes that one voice will get that chance to do it right in the legislature. Notwithstanding, I mean, same thing with Elizabeth May in 2015. I think it was 2015 when she defeated Gary Lunn, who'd been there for a long time. I don't think anyone was really mad at Gary Lunn, but in fact, I think it was. It doesn't matter when it happened. But the fact is, in a conservative riding, they thought, you know what, this person's going to make a difference for us, even if we don't agree with her. So, yeah, I think we're going to be in for some interesting times tomorrow night.
Can I add just like one more sort of interesting complicator in that we have this atmospheric river coming in on a Saturday vote, and like it's interesting because I was thinking about it too, because we could be positioned to have this really strong advanced poll turnout and then maybe a really weak E-Day turnout just because of Saturday pretty serious rainstorm. I mean, we'll see how the forecast evolves, how serious this actually is, but for now, potentially, it could be the kind of thing that people say, you know what, I got to stay home.
Well, I don't know that rainstorm is evenly applied throughout the province, so that's part of it.
Yep. So it's mostly the coast. Yeah, go ahead.
And who has more resolve to vote?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, if we were in the States, we'd have to watch social media to see who blamed the government for the timing and location of the atmospheric
storm. Well, fortunately, we're not. Although I will say, I think this is one of the and we'll get to this next, but I think this is one of the themes. I think we just have seen more of that kind of that vernacular around that kind of American vernacular creep into this election for sure. Posts, John Rastad won the election, or some of the back and forth on Twitter. But all right. So moving ahead. Oh, actually, should we talk at all about the Leger numbers that were out yesterday? Actually, Mike, I don't know if we.
Yeah, Leger, I think, has the NDP up by 4. The last week, they had them up by 5. And I'll just say one more time on the methodology side, there has been a big difference in this campaign between online polling and IVR, which is the robocall. And they're different in how they collect their sample. I'm assuming they're all weighted the same way. They're reflecting StatsCan data. So it's not like one form will have way more old people than the other. That's not what I'm saying. It's how people receive the survey. For an online panel, you have to belong to a panel. You have to sign up to a panel in order to get a survey back. So not everybody wants to do that, right? So it's a niche segment of the population that does these online surveys. Robocall, you have to decide you're going to answer a robocall, which is a niche segment of the population. So there are differences. There are underlying differences to both methodologies. My firm that I work with, Polera, we've blended the two. So our numbers have tended to be in between. The Leger and Angus and Ipsos, who've done online polling, and Research Co., and on the other side, all by themselves, naked, often the blue side of the polling numbers is Main Street. And so, just remember that when you're looking at polling numbers, maybe one of those modes will prove to be the most accurate, but we won't know until it's over.
Are the differences we've been seeing between them typical historically, or is that gap growing?
It seems more pronounced this time, but I just based that on my hunch. But it's extreme. It's becoming more and more challenging. Let's all shed a tear for the pollster here, who has finding it very tough to, increasingly tough to predict these elections. Our poor little pollsters. But some will.
I feel like, isn't there like an emotional cycle with pollsters though, where like we like, after the election, sometimes we'll critique them for missing it, but then when it comes in the lead up to election again, they're everybody's best friend, and we want to hear everything they want to say.
Everyone wants it, no matter what. But
yeah, they're okay.
It may well be that one batch of those pollsters has exactly right, and plus, people do move their feet between the last poll and election day too. So there's always that. In Alberta in 2012, no one could believe that Alison Redford actually won, but actually people literally did move in the final 2 days in that election. So now in this case, maybe half the people have voted already. So the last minute surge here in BC may not be as impactful, if there is one.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll know very soon.
Yes, I want to talk to you today about the important role we all play in reducing the risk of damage to utility infrastructure. Public safety is the number one priority of our sponsor, Fortis BC, and raising awareness of the importance of safe excavation is one of the ways they keep their customers and infrastructure safe. That means clicking or calling BC One Call before digging or any other ground disturbance, even something as simple as planting shrubs, gardening, or building a fence. BC One Call is a free service that provides location details of utility lines in the area an individual is looking to work in, ultimately reducing the risk of accidental damage. Over the past number of years, Fortis BC has observed an overall downward trend in the number of third-party damages to its gas lines, demonstrating the effectiveness of ongoing efforts to raise awareness and promote safe digging practices. Residents and contractors can contact BC One Call by visiting their website, www.bc1c.ca, or calling 1-800-474-6886. Website again, www.bc1c.ca. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Okay, I'm going to move us along to our last segment of the show, or our last big segment. Let's take some time and do some macro observations about the campaign. And I want to step back, and I'll start with you, Geoff, because let's step back and ask maybe what we thought this campaign would be about, and then what it was about.
Well, what David Eby's team wanted the campaign to be about was solid, competent leadership, continuing the great work being done by David Eby and his team, as opposed to taking the incredible risk of what turned out to be John Rustad, which wasn't clear till quite close to the actual election period. And that message proved to be a challenging one for Eby in a number of respects, because the Rustad campaign was really, really, really negative, and the Eby campaign had to become very negative as well to underline the risk factor. They had a lot of material to work with. And so as I was thinking about this morning and getting up and having my first coffee, I thought, I remember campaigns, I won't go into which one, but that were exceedingly negative, and they have a debilitating and demoralizing aspect to them. But in this case, there is a lot of anger in BC, which David Eby has acknowledged repeatedly, on a whole bunch of fronts, and John Rustad was seeking to channel that, and he wasn't too worried really about whether or not he had a specific or coherent explanation about what he would do. He was just going to be there for the people who were really, really frustrated. And from Eby's standpoint, the difficulty was to say, yeah, I know it's bad, which is already a concessionary start, but we're turning the corner. I have your back. I'm committed to action. I've done a lot, and so on and so forth. The other thing I think we should explore a bit more in the coming days is who are the Conservatives, right? And I think that they're qualitatively different from the Conservatives that I think of when I think of, say, Stephen Harper. They're closer to the old Reform BC people. When I look at Danielle Smith's government, I see a lot of similarities, but I don't want to class these folks as Albertan or Albertan influence. They're distinctively BC people who have many of the same concerns as people who were so problematic in the Alberta situation that they drove out Jason Kenney and led to Danielle Smith getting in. So this is a deeper thing I think we need to spend some time on. And I think it's been difficult for the New Democrats, who've run an excellent campaign according to conventional standards and benchmarks, up against something that is pretty new animal on the Canadian scene and is not behaving in predictable ways. So that's going to be a fascinating outcome to watch tomorrow.
You're jumping ahead of us, because really a lot of what's going to be written about that will be in what the result is. I mean, I'll put this to you though, Mike. I think it's worth rehashing a bit of like, what do we think this campaign was going to be about? What was it about?
Well, I thought this campaign was going to be a lot more about affordability and some of the bread and butter issues. And
totally.
It was touched on earlier on in the campaign, but it didn't really revolve around it. And if there's one issue that I think leapt to the front of the campaign, it was probably crime, drugs, mental health, and the street situation is probably the most talked about issue in the campaign. But the campaign, I don't think really had a center, like I think it hopped around a bit and around anger, as Geoff says. And I think what, over the course of 2024, the NDP have been slowly cooked in the pot starting from January, basically. They just never had any momentum because they had a big lead starting the year, and it was getting chipped away as BC United slid off the end of the table and finally disappeared. And the Conservatives were on the rise all year, and by the time we got to the election, the carbon tax is thrown out the window and voluntary care is put back on the table. A lot of pivots after the deal between Falcon and Rustad happened. And yeah, it was, disorienting, for I think a lot of political observers.
Totally. Is it important distinction though, Mike, that like, if you go back to January and look at the sort of the polling for the NDP, it's less of an erosion of their support and more of a consolidation on the right behind the BC Conservatives. That means it's a statistical tie, and that means they're playing for different votes.
Yes and no. I mean, I think, the consolidation is a huge part of it on the right, for sure. The lead eroded, but throughout the year, I believe time for a change built to the point where we got to the election period. And I think the appetite for time for change was a lot stronger in September than it was in May.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think in the forensics of this election, if the NDP wins re-election, it will be a huge blown opportunity for the non-NDP side of the equation, because this election was there for the taking. It was absolutely there for the taking, and the Conservatives may well win yet tomorrow. But if they don't, then the dysfunction between BC United and BC Conservatives over the last year and a half will have been the reason why the NDP won, in my opinion.
Can I paint a different scenario? Because I think one of the hardest scenarios for figuring out the future of this BC Conservative animal is if they end up really, really tight and there's like a couple independents and a couple Greens who hold the balance of power. Because like that's a real kind of like batten down the hatches, pull it together kind of scenario if you're going to, and like that's going to be particularly hard for them if that's what it ends up being. If they end up forming government, a little bit clear. If they end up in opposition, then I think it bolsters the ranks who might want to say overturn Rustad and take it in a different direction. Is that fair?
I think it's fair to say people are going to feel a certain way depending on what the numbers are on election night. And there's a big difference between 50-40 and 40. Even if they lose 48-45 doesn't feel as much of a loss as say 50-40 does. And I know that when it's been in the past, like 48-45 or something like really razor thin, and I'm thinking of like 96 or 2017, the side that loses feels like they're still ready to fight.
Yeah.
And they're thinking like, we can bring this government down.
Or that we were cheated. We were cheated.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Which was certainly part of the mood when Gordon Campbell lost to Glenn Clark in '96. There was a huge sense of betrayal.
And they were low, and that opposition in '96 was loaded for bear right from the get-go, and there was no honeymoon. No. And 2017 was different. The air came out of the tires when Plekas left, but it and then other things. But it's it's we just don't know what we're gonna know until the numbers come in.
I'm Hamas, and this is Simon, and we live in Surrey. We started hosting on Airbnb because we thought we had the spare room, and why not share it with people? When our guests come in, first thing usually they ask is, I'm really hungry, it's been a really long flight, can you recommend a place? Usually Simon is really good with that. He knows all the good spaces. Because we got a lot of good reviews and people commented on the overall look of the space, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this for a living. It actually gave me the courage to start school in interior design. It made such an impact on us financially, and I don't know, I think we're happier because we started Airbnb for sure.
Learn more at airbnb.com/host.
Can I circle back to Surrey and draw this contrast? I would recommend, if people have access to the Globe and Mail, to look at Justine Hunter's analysis today, which talks a bit about the campaign. And she names some of the people who some of them we've had on the show, but not others, who were very instrumental in forcing Kevin Falcon to implode BC United. People like Eric Carlson, he's a developer, very conservative by outlook, who's done a column in the Times Colonist, very, very personal attack on David Eby. The Chip Wilson signs, of course. Gordon Campbell, also out of Point Grey. She mentions Norman Stowe, an iconic figure in communications and event management circles, but also close to Kevin Falcon. But these people are all from BC, as I knew it growing up, the Vancouver business and development establishment. And we have another argument going on in Surrey completely, which we haven't talked about too much in this campaign, but I think it has a lot to do with, we had this declaration of diplomatic war by Justin Trudeau last week, which will have a thunderclap effect in Surrey generally, because there's so many South Asians in Surrey. But how it will play, I don't know. But it can't be a non-factor. Similarly, I think Selena Robinson's editorial had more impact, especially in certain key areas, than I would have expected. And, we've talked about Selena Robinson before. I don't want to revisit the issue. But her editorial, and I was hearing this yesterday, has impacted people, particularly in the Jewish community. But it also triggered a political mobilization in the Muslim community, which is going to have its own, sets of interests and concerns as they get to go to the polls. Now a much more, high-profile part. So this whole Kevin Falcon, BC United discussion, as far as I could tell, was carried on without any reference whatsoever to crucial new groups in BC's political economy, like South Asians, whether they be Muslim or Sikh, Chinese Canadians, and we're going to see that fight happen in Richmond, where there has been more focus on Soji, more focus on you can't put a drug den in my neighborhood, those kinds of hot button issues. But I don't think that Rustad and the Conservatives have yet established a base as diverse as the NDP in those communities, and we'll see if that has an impact for the NDP.
Can we pick up? Okay, go ahead.
Can I just
quickly
respond to that?
Yeah.
I think the deal that came down between Rustad and Falcon, there's obviously were backroom players involved, applying pressure to encourage that deal to happen. But I also think that was reflective of a will or a desire among the base to do something, to not go into the election in a self-defeating way where two parties are going to be chewing at the same electorate. So, I kind of look at what did the base want, and the base probably wanted something to happen. Not everyone's happy for sure. There's definitely people running as independents, and
but Mike, what they said is, I don't care if there's racists there. I don't care if they're homophobic. I don't care if all that nut stuff is going on. Yeah. I'm so determined to defeat David Eby that I'll take all that. And that to me is one of the dangerous signs going forward.
Well, there is pick your poison. I think a lot of people are facing it. I have lots of friends who feel they're facing a very difficult choice here. and who are traditional BC Liberals. But the Conservatives are probably polling some traditional NDPers as well, that are okay with the offering, So, I mean, that's what the polls show us. There's some crossover between the parties this time. The BC Conservatives are not the BC Liberals. They are different. And that means new voters in, some old voters out, and we'll see how it all lines up. But on the multicultural side though, Geoff, like from the polling I've seen is that, the Conservatives are doing pretty well in Chinese and South Asian,
No, I'm sure they are. I'm just talking about the candidates.
Yeah.
And who the spokespeople are and so on. But we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Surrey, we've always assumed Vancouver was more or less a straightforward, largely NDP leaning situation, with the exception of Yaletown. Surrey, I'm sure we'll be talking about it a lot tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We have time for just one more quick note. And I just want to say, because reflecting on our conversations, we had a conversation with Glenn Clark and Gordon Campbell back to back, and they had very different things to say. But I'd say one thing they were aligned on was a bit of like, this doesn't feel normal. This doesn't feel like a normal election. And some of the move in particular that the Conservatives are making feels a bit more out of line, a bit more, maybe I'll put it in both camps and say there's a bit more divisiveness too. I think we heard from Gordon Campbell a bit of, the NDP's gone so far left. I just wanted to ask, do you agree, because both of you are such veterans of this political scene, would you agree with this assessment that this election just maybe showing us that campaigns have changed in some fundamental way, Geoff? Is there something lasting and different now in BC?
Well, I think so, because, I was struck by the war of op-ed pieces in the last 3 or 4 days, which very few people will read, but people will point to. I mean, the mainstream media is vaporized as a factor, notwithstanding the excellent performance of our good friends at Global, who stand out because they're exceptional. That they still command a significant audience, and province-wide, it's very, very, very difficult to find that otherwise. So I think that's a problem, but also I think way more deep thinking is going to be required about how to campaign over a longer period of time, because to Mike's point about the momentum that was in the Conservatives, and in many respects, the Conservative campaign was easy for someone to participate in, for months and months and months. Whereas the NDP campaign was very much in a traditional way organized at the writ period and focused on the writ period. And, I think how those voters are identified, the affinity groups that might be interested in talking about stuff, the support you get from social media outlets that are not part of your political machine is very important. And I think the Conservatives have a significant advantage in some of those areas.
Mike, significant change? New era?
Well, I think we'll continue to see the earned media play a less important role in campaigns, at least until such time that they regain market share. So I think a lot of the campaigning is pushed into social media, is pushed into other venues. And that makes a difference in terms of how parties communicate. And parties, I think, are much more, it's not just the communication side, it's also the fundraising side too. To raise money in this day and age, you're needing to have hot buttons, and that, to me, it does debase the conversation to some degree. However, I think 4 years from now, when we have another election, I don't think it'll be like this one. I think the contending party to the NDP, no matter what happens tomorrow night, will have more depth, more infrastructure, and will just maybe sound a little different. And probably, I think the other thing I just reflect on too is with the fixed election day, which I've always been a big fan of, we do create a longer campaign period. And is that great? Is that actually a good thing? It's probably better for the opposition so that they know what the timing is and can plan accordingly. But it does make for a longer conversation, and I think government operates in that mode a lot longer than if they just decided to drop the writ. So those are,
We may not have to wait 4 years, Mike.
Well,
It's so tight. It's so tight
So,
that
yeah.
it may require another round to figure it out.
Yeah. And we'll get a close-up contrast of fixed election date versus surprise. But all right, let's go grab our last coffee together, gentlemen.
I'm going to raise a frothing glass of cappuccino to a small publication up north called theskeena.com, an online newsletter that covers events in the Skeena watershed, stuff that's going on from a community perspective. But they did a great editorial yesterday pointing out that people had hung up a sign of Nathan Cullen, the candidate in the Bulkley Valley, Stikeen area, with a noose around his neck, and it was by the highway for some time. And so the Skeena.com denounced that and said there's no place for political violence in our BC culture, period. We're better than that. So I want to raise my glass to the Skeena.com and thank them for raising that voice at this point.
Thank you. Yeah. Mike?
Well, I will raise a frothy mug to the Conservatives, and here's why. No matter what happens tomorrow night, this party has come out of the wilderness in the last 18 months, has not governed since 1928 to 33, and has been a political also-ran for a long time in British Columbia, basically since the 50s. And what they've done in the last 18 months, with a lot of help from the federal side of things in terms of the brand strength, is almost unprecedented. Probably you'd have to look at the social rise of the social credit, 1952, as an analogy there. But they're not everyone's flavor, but it is a remarkable story, and there's probably a relatively small group of people who were there 18 months ago who believed in it. And if they win government tomorrow night, they will have pulled it off, a heist. They will pull off a major heist of votes that is like robbing Fort Knox. So I have to acknowledge that that party has done something that no one thought could happen. So there you go.
And a lot of people within that campaign who are just figuring stuff out and really, I think, taking big leaps of courage to just get stuff done and build something, which, even if they don't win, what they have built is, again, a historic precedent. All right. I'm going to raise my glass. I'm going to raise a cortado because it's my favorite drink, and I will raise it to the spouses, the partners of all the candidates, and it is inspired by one in particular. It's inspired by Grace Lore's husband, Rob Lore, who I saw on social media yesterday, was going around, bless his heart, removing graffiti from signs, some really hateful, awful graffiti. And when he couldn't wash it off, he'd made this like heart-shaped sponge with like orange paint on it, and was just like dabbing like a heart emoji onto the signs, lawn signs. So that's a good egg. That's a good work. And I suspect there's a bunch of spouses out there doing a lot of unsung labor, to support their partner in doing something that a lot of people don't have the courage to do. And that is a really, really good thing to do. So anyway, my glass is raised to the spouses and the partners. Yeah. All right. That's it. That's it, gentlemen. Here we go. All right. Thanks to all of our guests for taking a long-term stay at Hotel Pacifico. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed your stay, we are in the hospitality business, so we do encourage you to leave us a 5-star review, please. I want...
Well, 4 would be fine.
4 would be
No,
fine.
well,
No,
we
Mike
want
doesn't
5.
like
No,
5.
we got-
I've been
okay.
We like 5.
I mean,
Uncompromising. Okay.
you have a very specific complaint about one of us. I think 4 is acceptable, but 5 otherwise. I want to thank you all for joining us for our final 18th episode of our daily election podcast. Thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsors, Fortis BC, Airbnb, and BC Dairy. We will see you guests actually on Global TV Election Night. and look forward to all collecting there. And then we will see you next Tuesday when we will resume our weekly podcast with a recap of this election. All these things we're waiting to see happen. We'll have lots to say about. So we'll see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Check out time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.